Hello! I hope you're having a good day today. I'm TR Rose with MeowAbout Cosplay, and today I'll be showing you how to make a Halloween activity. So my son wants to be Luigi for Halloween this year, which is great fun. I'm a big fan. But since it's still a pandemic, he's going to need a face mask, at least for when he's outside running around in his costume. As we all know, Luigi is known for his enormous, fantastic mustache. And while his costume kit did come with a sticky mustache, that's not going to be fun to try to put a mask over top of. Not to mention trying to eat or drink or just run around and get sweaty while having this mustache stuck to your face. So my idea is to make a mask that he can wear while playing out in his costume, but put a mustache on the front so he can still have the Luigi look. So let's get started. So for our mask, I went to Joann Fabrics this morning and I bought some cotton broadcloth. What I did is as soon as I came home, I washed it and I dried it in the dryer for about 10 minutes on high speed. And the reason I did that is so that it would shrink before we started to work with it. It's always a good idea to pre-shrink your fabrics like cotton, because otherwise the first time you wash them, you're going to get puckered seams or it may never fit. So I have my template here. And what I like to use when I'm cutting things out is I use these vintage paperweights to hold my fabric in place. I have my template, and I like to use a rotary cutter. I think it's a bit more precise than scissors. So for this, I'm going to line this up here. And I just trace around the edges with my rotary cutter. Be very careful because this is a blade. And once I did manage to slice my hand pretty good when I was using the rotary cutter. So keep your fingers clear. There's our first piece. And there we go. We have our two pieces cut out, ready to sew together. So next, we'll take our two pieces of fabric that we've cut out and we'll pin them together so we can sew them. One thing I would like to note is that I don't use a traditional pin cushion. I use these little magnetized trays that I got at the hardware store. These are supposed to be for when you're working out in the garage and you have a bunch of nails or screws. I find that these work really well to keep my pins and my safety pins on. That way you have less chance of dropping some. And if you do drop any pins or needles, just run this over it since it's got a magnet and it picks them up like magic. So I'll take my two pieces, line them up along the edge, that's so that they match perfectly. And then I'll just add a few pins perpendicular to the seam. Now that the pieces are held together, I will run a seam on my sewing machine. And if you notice me pushing this lever down, I backstitch at the beginning and the end of the seam to lock it in place. Lift the presser foot, use our scissors to cut those extra threads, pull out the pins, and you'll see that our two pieces are now sewn together. Now since I have my serger out, I'm going to serge over that seam that I just sewed to keep it from fraying. So here's our piece sewn together. And I'm just going to serge that edge. Press your foot down. And there we go. Our pieces are sewn together and they're nicely finished off. Next, I'm going to use my iron to press these edges down so we can sew them on our sewing machine. Let's go to the iron next. So I actually decided while the iron was heating up to serge these edges here and here also. That will avoid some loose strings when we finish the sewing. So what I do, since this is going to be a very small seam, I like to take my iron and iron down just a small amount rather than trying to pin a very narrow seam allowance. So I'll go and fold this, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I'll fold this along a very narrow edge, and then I'll use my iron to press it in place. If you do this, you don't have to worry about pinning. And you see, it just stays in place. Certainly make it look neat, but if you don't get it perfect, that's okay. There's nobody doing craftsmanship judging for masks. And now we're ready to sew again. We have our mask with the edges folded down, and now we're going to sew. And that's our top edge finished. Now we have to sew the bottom. Our top and bottom are now sewn. Now it's back to the ironing board to fold under this small amount, just the same as before, so that we can sew that down and then flip it over to make the casing for the elastic. So now I've used my iron to press down this edge. I've also taken the time to chop off those really long tails from the serger. Now I'll sew down these edges, then we're going to fold it over and sew so we have a nice finished loop, and this is where the elastic will go. Now we don't need to crease this as strongly as we did for the other ones, so we can skip the iron for this part. But we just fold it over, and make sure you measure with your elastic to know that you're going to make a casing big enough for your elastic to fit inside. So for this one, I'll just fold this over. I'm going to use just a handful of pins. And I've made many of these, so I know how to eyeball this to see what size I need. But if you're not sure, or this is your first one, definitely measure this. So we have our pins here, and now I'm going to sew very close to this edge. And repeat for the other side. Pull out the pins. And at this step, you'll probably want to cut off all these loose hanging threads. It's not necessary, but it makes your project look a lot cleaner when they're all removed. And I just have a trash can right here that I like to put my strings in. So no, I'm not just dumping them on the floor. And now we have the base part of our mask. We just need to add the elastic. We'll be right back. So here's our elastic. This is 1/4 inch thick elastic. And what I have learned from making a bunch of these is that I need a piece that is 7 inches long for a child's mask. Since I have this wonderful cutting mat that has a ruler built in, I can simply line this up with the edge, bring it to the 7-inch mark, and use my rotary cutter to slice it right there. Makes a very precise cut, and I can be sure I'm measuring it properly each time. Next, we need to thread this elastic into these casings that we made. So the way to do that is to use a safety pin. So I'll take a safety pin, a nice small one, poke it through the edge of the elastic, so you have something nice and hard to push through this opening. So we'll take this, we'll insert it into the casing that we made and sort of push the fabric so that you get the elastic to work through. If it gets stuck, just back it up and try it again. So now you'll see you have the elastic completely through. So we disconnect the safety pin, push this to the center, and then we'll just take this elastic and tie a knot. Pull it together nice and snug. And then I like to work the knot through so it's inside the casing. That means it's less likely to fray, and of course it has a nice cleaner look. We'll repeat this with the opposite side. And now, our basic face mask is complete. Next, we get to make the mustache. So now we have our finished mask that is fully assembled, and now we need to design and add the mustache. So, using the Super Mario Bros. Coloring book as a reference, I've done some designing, and I've cut out a paper mustache. And if we put it on the mask, we can see that the size looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to use for the mustache is a fun foam sheet. Now I've tested this sort of technique before when I made a mask to go with my Link costume from Legend of Zelda to wear to the Renaissance Festival. I made a mask, as you can see, Navi the fairy. Her body is a pom-pom, but her wings here are made of fun foam, and this is all attached to the mask with hot glue. I've worn this out to the Renaissance Festival in heat. Nothing moved, nothing melted, so that's what we're going to do for our mustache today. So I'm going to move this out of the way, use my fun foam sheet, and trace my mustache. And now I'm going to cut it out. And we have our mustache, but there's one thing we have to do first. Before we attach it to our mask, we need to try this on our little Luigi to make sure that I'm positioning it properly and not putting the foam over his nose. Stay tuned. So here's our mustache, and here is my son modeling the mask. So I've got to find, where is your nose?
It's right up here.
It's right up here, but the bottom of your nose is right about here. So I'm going to put a little bitty pencil mark on it, so that that is where we will glue mustache.
Not trouble.
That's good. So since the last time we spoke, having tried this on my son, my husband pointed out that it just didn't look right with only a mustache and no nose. So I wanted to complete this before filming in case I made a big mess of it. So what I did is I folded some scrap paper. I made an oval, which I cut out, placed on the mask, and if you'll notice I have the mask here on a tailor's ham so that I can have this stretched over a curved surface. Since the front of the mask is curved, there's no way to paint or draw on it lying completely flat. So I traced over my oval with an ordinary pencil, and then I used detail fabric paint to trace over those lines. So now we have to wait for this to dry, and I'm going to err on the side of caution and probably let this set for several hours, making sure that this is completely away from dust or wind so it can completely dry. And then we will be taking our wonderful mustache and hot gluing it onto the front. Welcome back. I decided to let the fabric paint for the nose dry overnight, so now it's a different day. Our next step is to use our hot glue gun to attach the mustache to the front of the mask. Since I want the edges of the mustache to sit on the edges and hang free, I'm only going to apply glue to this very center part. I'm not going to glue these side pieces down. And again, if you're using a hot glue gun, I advise you to be very careful. So we just dab a little bit of glue right here in the middle. We line up our mustache with the bottom of the nose, making sure that that point is right along the seam, and we press and hold for a few seconds until it dries. And now we have our mustache mask. Now the final step is to try it on our Luigi. So here you can see our finished Luigi mask, and I'll be putting some templates in the description for the nose and the mustache that I designed so that you can make your own. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please smash that bell. And most importantly, I hope you try this out. Take care.